everybody has the best intentions in trying to protect their children from harm. But no matter what you do, no matter how perfect you get it, you can't prevent the world from coming to them. You can't guard them from the world. At some point, the world is going to come to them and say something to them. It's inescapable. I mean, Adam and Eve were in the garden. God was the perfect father, the perfect parental guardian. He walked with Adam every day, and the world still came to Adam. And when I say the world, I mean the wisdom of the world. Right? You can't keep them from that. And almost if you try to keep them from it, it can even become a negative. It become a worse kind of a thing. Right? God didn't try to pretend that the Lucifer, who was supposed to be a ministering angel to Adam and Eve, pointing them to the tree of life, God didn't try to pretend that Lucifer hadn't corrupted his wisdom, and now let us just keep Adam and Eve from knowing that Lucifer had corrupted his wisdom. No, God came and said, don't eat from that tree. He told them about the tree. He told them that tree could bring death. Right? And so we'd be much better off not trying to shield our children, but talking to them about the different ways that the world will try to cause them to stumble over the truth. Right? And that's what Paul said. He didn't want them to be beguiled by the devices of the serpent like Eve was. But he wanted them to know the way the serpent will come to them, to try to lie to them, to try to cause them to stumble over the truth. And so we'd be much better off not trying to shield our kids, but talking to them about the way the wisdom in the world will try to come to them and get them to stumble over the truth. How it will try to shape their lives. And absent knowing that, which, listen, if we're just being honest, most of us never knew that because the church never knew. And so we were all going to the church that never knew, so how could we ever know? Right? I mean, so absent that, the best thing anybody can do as a parent is to point their kids to God as the giver of life and the Savior from sin and death. Point to God as their heavenly Abba, who is never far from them, who will never separate himself from them, that no matter what pit they find themselves in, he's happy to go be there with them in it and talk to them and uphold them and carry them out of it. Right? It's like you see all these comic books and you see the superhero come out with the damsel in distress in their arms, that's Abba. Abba finds us in the pit, dying and bloodied and beaten by the world, by what the world has said about our life, by what the world has accused us of, by the shame the world has brought us to, by the death the world has come and smacked us in the face with. And Abba is the one who comes and picks us up and carries us out of the miry pit and stands us up. And he doesn't just leave us standing there by ourselves. He upholds us, right? It's like that exercise that you do where they try to teach you to trust and they say, okay, close your eyes now and just fall back. They do it in businesses all the time. They try to get the team. We build teamwork. This is how we're going to build it, right? And so that's how it can look with God.
I was going to say is what I see is we don't teach our children to make good decisions. They don't know how to make their own decisions.
And even more than making the right decision, because so often we just want to, and this isn't to cause anybody shame or condemnation, because your kid's success in life isn't based on whether you got it right.
No.
Right? It's not. It's just not. So there's no system where you could have gotten it right enough and they would have had it better. There's no system of that. That's a lie from the pit of hell. That's how the serpent would come to you and try to convince you to be filled with shame. You didn't get it right. Now look. No. That's a lie from the pit of hell. That cometh not from above, it cometh from below. But even more than just making the right decisions, because we can tell kids, don't do this, don't do that, blah, 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 blah. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if we can start getting them to see the foundation from where we know whether we're making the right decision, right? For instance, we don't make decisions from the foundation of lack. Right? Something I've learned is that when I make a decision based on the feeling of lack, it's going to be unwise. Yeah. Right? And so that's something we can teach our kids. We could teach our kids about the feeling of lack and how the feeling of lack tries to motivate us to do things and to make decisions that are contrary to what can give us life. That the very idea that we could lack life or lack a good report is a lie. You know, for instance, if you're talking about a peer situation, you know, if you're out with a bunch of your friends and you're all partying and you have like the peer pressure going on and your friends are doing all this crazy stuff and you're thinking, man, I need a good report with my friends. I need a good report about my life. So you're wavering. You're trying to make a decision. Do I go off and do that or not? Right? See, if your kids could see that feeling of I'll lack acceptance, that feeling of I'll lack a good report about my life, that feeling that I'm not as I ought to be if I don't do it, that feeling of I'll be rejected, if they can know that's the voice of the serpent, right? It makes it easier to make the right decision. Yes, we can tell them to make the right decision, but if we can come with the wisdom that actually strengthens somebody to make the right decision, how much more powerful is that? Do you see what I'm saying? Do you see? If I could have been swimming, and you guys have to guard your hearts when we're just honest with the things that we say. But if I could have been swimming with the idea that my failures on the track could never be a word about my life, or about whether I was a success or a failure, or whether I was a good boy or a bad boy, or whether I had value or worth, if I could have known that, if I could have had that inside of me, it would have helped me when I came across, will I get high or will I not? Because I would have recognized this great feeling of lack I had that was bringing me pain, that was causing me to think, will I do this or not? I would have recognized that's the serpent, right? I would have had an understanding of what was going on. I would have had eyes to see, so to speak, right? And that could have strengthened me to make the right decision. I already knew. Right? I mean, when I grew up, it was the age of just say no. So I'd taken all the just say no classes. I mean, let me tell you what, you tell a kid who don't know anything about drugs, just say no, now their mind's filled with why. Yeah. Their mind's filled with all the drugs now. Right? The better way to do it is to teach them about how they don't lack. And to teach them how the world's going to try to convince them they lack. Because it's the pain or the peer pressure, all those things that drive people to do drugs. But if I had known that, I could have received strength to make the right decision instead of just, I got to use my willpower to make the right decision. Because when you're in the midst of feeling pain, or you're in the midst of thinking your whole identity in life is on the line, listen, it's not about an intellectual choice to make the right decision or the wrong decision. You're feeling great pressure. And that pressure is going to promote the decision. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. And so we can teach our kids now how this goes. And when you look in Deuteronomy, when it talked about teaching the kids, when they got brought into the promised land, one thing Moses says to teach them, that it wasn't by strength of your hand that you got all this stuff, but it was by strength of God's hand. He said, put this law, wrap it even around their heads and wrap it on their arms. That's a type and a shadow. You know what he was teaching them? Man's tendency is to think that by strength of my hand will I find acceptance. By strength of my hand will I find life. By strength of my hand will I find approval. It's a way of thinking. That's why you wrap it around your head and you put it on your arm. Man tends to look to their own strength and their own ability to bring forth good fruit, their own ability to get people to accept them, their own ability to find acceptance. Man tends to look to that. So God tells Moses, put this law around their head, even on their arm. That every time they think it's strength of their arm that has gotten them all these things in the promised land, they'll see on their very arm that says, no, it was by strength of God's arm. Right? And so if we wrap our children's heads in that, a dynamic thing can happen where that begins making the right decisions in them. Do you see? Something in them begins making the right decision. So when they begin looking to, I can gain acceptance if I do this, they'll look and they'll see, I can't gain acceptance by strength of my arm. Do you see how that makes it easier for them to not give in to the peer pressure? Right? You see how that works? And that's what that thing is. in the law that he says written there. We find so much of our thinking about the law. That's why I spend so much time preaching about what the law of God actually is. Because if we have our minds filled with the carnal interpretation of the law of God, we're going to trust in our own arm. Right? And so the law that God said to write around their head, even on their arm, was not thou shalt not. That law was, you shall have one God, the Lord your God. Him shall you worship only. Jesus came and said the way you worship God is you believe what he believes. He said God is spirit, and because he's spirit, you can't worship him through your works. You can only worship him in spirit, which means spirit is a truth, and you worship God by believing what God believes. What does God believe? That you can't be justified or have life by strength of your arm. That's what God believes. So that's the law that Moses said to wrap around their heads, even on their arms. So that when they got into the promised land, they saw that the buildings were there. The houses were there. The fruit was abundant everywhere. That they didn't have to do anything. That they didn't get in there and say, I have all this because of myself. That's what he was trying to guard them against. Right? That's what he was trying to... Lest when they enter the promised land, they say, by strength of my hand, I've gotten all these things. Lest they say, because we've worked the carnal ordinances of the law, we have all these things. Lest they say, because we've been performing the animal sacrifices, we have all these things. Lest they say, because we're the chosen people of Israel, we have all these things. Do you see? That's a haughty heart. A heart lifted up in pride. Listen, it's wonderful to love. And I thank God that I can experience what it feels like to love people the way he experiences. But in the day, I become of a mind that says, because I love, I'm better than a guy who doesn't love. I'm more beautiful than a guy who doesn't love. I'm more acceptable to God than a guy who doesn't. In the day, that's what my wisdom tells me. I've missed it. I've missed it. Jesus, this is shocking for people, but Jesus didn't come and tell us we should love. He came and told us how we could find our lives animated with love. Big difference. Big difference. He came and said you were created for love. And then he told everyone how you can find your life animated by love. That's why he said, abide in me. I am the vine and you are the branch. A branch cannot produce fruit apart from the vine. What else did Jesus say? I am the truth that is the way unto life. So if you abide in the truth that was made flesh in Jesus, which is that you can't produce fruit through your own ability. Only God can produce fruit in you. Listen, my mom can't bring 4 children without my dad. Should she think she can, it's going to be a problem. She'll be laboring and toiling like crazy. She'll be living by the sweat of her brow. Do you see what I'm saying? And she'll never be able to bring forth fruit. Right? It's the same thing that Jesus was teaching. Listen, guys, you weren't created to be able to bring forth fruit. You were created to be one with God, and God would bring forth his fruit in you apart from your works, apart from your self-effort. That's what Jesus came teaching. There is a spirit. It's called the Spirit of Truth. This truth speaks a word about the beauty of God and the beauty of his thoughts and intentions towards you. And as you abide in that truth abides in you, and that truth acts like a tree or a seed that gives root to a tree of life in your heart, and that produces fruit like crazy. I mean, trying to tell people that they're supposed to bring forth love is like going out to the ground and trying to tell a branch laying on the ground, you must plant yourself, you must grow, and you must produce satsumas. I mean, doesn't that sound ridiculous? How many of us think we're going to go out to the yard, find a branch laying in the yard, look at that branch, disconnected from the tree, and tell that branch, listen, don't you know, you're supposed to be fruitful. Now, go plant yourself into the ground and start producing fruit, man. Now that sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But that's the equivalent of how ridiculous it sounds when we think we're going to tell people they must love. And I say this all the time, but it always bears repeating. Jesus did not say that the new commandment was to love. That is a misinterpretation of the Scriptures. He said, a new commandment I give you, even one that has been from the beginning. A new commandment I give you that's old. That sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it? Why was it new? Because the carnal mind didn't understand that the commandment of God wasn't you should bring forth good fruit and not bring forth bad fruit. And so Jesus says the commandment that's been from the beginning is to enter into God's rest, and God has promised you He will make you fruitful. When you go back and look at Genesis, when the King James Version translates go and be fruitful, it doesn't mean for them to go make themselves fruitful. It's actually a promise. When you interpret that in the Hebrew, it says, I will make you fruitful. God was calling forth fruitfulness in them by telling them, listen, I will make you fruitful. You won't make yourself fruitful. And so the new commandment Jesus gave was abide in Him. And then He says, abide in me so that you are able to love the way that you see me loving. He was telling them how it would happen to them. He said, I abide in my Father's word. What was the Father's word to Jesus? You are my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. I promise you, I will make you the heir of the world. I promise you, I will make you exceedingly fruitful. God promised Abraham He would make Abraham the father of many nations, didn't He? He didn't tell Abraham, go make yourself the father of many nations. He didn't say, Abraham, well, you're supposed to be the father of many nations. Where are we at with that? And when Abraham thought that meant he must make himself the father of many nations, he brought forth an Ishmael, didn't he? And then God came back and said, I am El Shaddai. First of all, God waited till Abraham passed the time where he could have a child. He waited for Abraham to be completely dead to where he couldn't do it. That's why there's 13 years in between the time he has the Ishmael and where he talks to him again in Genesis 17. There's 13 years. So Sarah's womb was already dead. But Abe could still bring forth seed. And so God, all right, we're going to wait for this guy. He can't have kids anymore. So he waits. Then he comes to Abraham. Listen, man, I am El Shaddai. I am the all-sufficient one. Your sufficiency to be the father of many nations is not of you and your ability. It's of me and my ability. That's when he changes his name from Abram to Abraham. The letter that he added to Abram's name is the letter for grace. It's Hey. It's the 5th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So he added grace to Abram's name to make him Abraham, declaring to Abraham, not by strength of your hand will you be the father of many nations, but by grace, which is my strength, will you be the father of many nations. It's the same thing with us. Not by strength of your hand, not by your desire to love, not by your desire to do the right thing will you find love coming out of you, but by strength of my hand will you find love coming out of you. Oh, and by the way, my arm, my strength to manifest love in you was made flesh in the person of Jesus. Now abide in this truth that was made flesh in Jesus and find the tree of life manifesting in you. You guys see how all that lines up from the beginning to the end? But the carnal mind is so consumed with, I must be fruitful. Right? And so then we judge ourselves by the fruit we think we see. And it doesn't just, in the church, the primary way we do it is like by the fruit of the Spirit. We judge ourselves that way. But it goes much further than that. We judge ourselves by the good fruit we think we see happening in our lives in the world. Right? So if we think it's going well for us in our relationships at the time, then we think that means we're acceptable to God or we're getting it right. If things aren't going well, we think that means we're not acceptable to God. Right? You know, that lends to you comparing yourself amongst yourself. Right? Because while Jesus came and planted the tree of life in the earth so we could eat from that tree also, listen, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is still in the earth. And the system of the world is built on the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So guess what? All of us ain't going to look like we have the same carnal life. Right? Some people are going to have more money. Some people are going to have different jobs. Some people are going to have different situations with their family life. Now, we're not going to judge ourselves amongst ourselves to try to determine whether or not we're getting it right. That's judging one another after the flesh. Right? Jesus came to destroy that. Lazarus and the rich man. Which man had gotten it right? We all, based on the wisdom in the world, we all think the rich man's the one who got it right, right?
Yeah, that's poor old Lazarus.
Poor old. Now listen, Jesus wasn't saying that rich people can't get it right. He wasn't saying it's bad to be rich. He was talking specifically to a group of people who had judged money means you're the God kind. Right? Jesus was saying, just like Paul said with the meat, whether you eat the meat or don't eat the meat means nothing in comparison to whether or not God's happy with you. Whether you have money or don't have money means nothing when you're talking about, is God happy with me or not? Right? That's what Jesus was trying to teach. Okay? So there's nothing wrong with working hard and having money. But we're not going to judge ourselves by that. Right? Freedom can come when you find the freedom to work hard, but then not to judge your life or God's thoughts of you by the result. Freedom from judging the result. For so long we've judged ourselves by the result that we thought rest meant I won't do anything. Because we're so afraid of facing a negative result because we're still judging ourselves by the result. I was there. What I find now is the judgment has left and I find myself working harder than ever for what I want. I just don't find myself judging myself by how it's going. Do you see? There's actually hard work in all of us. And I don't mean hard work like, oh, it's so hard. I mean like hard work passion. Right? There's actually passion in all of us. And when we can remove the judgment where we judge our life, this passion that's been bottled up by the carnal mind can be set loose and it can just be unleashed in the world. And now we're just passionate, going after it, going after it, going after it. Innocently though. Never judging ourselves whether we're a success or a failure. Never judging ourselves by how it goes. Just passion. That's how Paul was. Paul said, I labor more abundantly than them all, yet not I, but the grace of God. He wasn't talking about just people. He was talking about the other apostles. He said, I labored more abundantly than them all. He was saying, man, grace did something inside of me that all I can say is, man. And that was a process for Paul. Paul was going around planting churches and the Judaizers would come after and start telling people they had to perform the works of the law and blowing up his churches. You see that in Galatia. He came and told them you can't be justified by your strength to bring forth good fruit. You can only be justified by resting in Jesus. And then the Judaizers came and said, no. You must be circumcised. Physically. And so if you read Corinthians, it said Paul had a thorn in the flesh. That wasn't a sickness. It wasn't a disease. And it didn't come from God. It specifically says, a messenger of Satan. And if you read the chapter before, the messenger of Satan was the Judaizers. They were coming and after all of his laboring to plant grace, and they were planting the law.
Frustration.
And so he thought, Lord, we could really get something done, man, if you would just take care of that. If you read through all Paul's letters, they all the time questioned his apostleship. They said he didn't walk with Jesus. He's not an apostle. They all the time came and destroyed it. That's why he said, lest I be exalted above measure. Lest the revelation I have be exalted above measure. This thorn in the flesh was given to me. Who would want grace to not be exalted above measure? God? No. The serpent. That's why it's a messenger of Satan that gave him the thorn. And so lest the revelation that Paul had, which he was running around like a madman, spreading, lest that revelation be exalted above measure, the messengers of Satan came trying to buffet him. And so Paul was very frustrated because he's planting all these churches. He's seeing people believe on the resurrection and the power of God. He's seeing them turn away from trusting in the flesh. And then he sees all these people come in behind him and just undo it all. And he becomes very frustrated. That's why he said he called out to God thrice. Any of you guys ever called out to God thrice? Yeah. Listen, man, that means you're frustrated and discouraged. It means you're feeling confusion. It means you're wondering what is going on. That's why you call out more than once. Because you're still confused. But then that's when Paul got this revelation. Listen, man, my grace is your sufficiency. That's what it actually says there. My strength is your sufficiency, not whether or not these guys come against you. Not whether or not you think you can see all the churches being built right. Paul had no idea the letters he wrote from prison were going to be recorded, and 2,000 years later the church was going to be reading and teaching. He had no idea there'd be some crazy bald-headed guy sitting around a table with a bunch of other beautiful people talking about his revelation. He had no idea this thing would spread widespread. See, he thought the revelation was being prevented. But God came and said, listen, man, my word will go forth and nothing can stop it. So you may think you see things that look like it's stopping my word from going forth and from manifesting in you. Nothing can stop it. And so if you're sitting here today and you're thinking that something is stopping God's word from manifesting in me and going forth in my heart, my mind, and my thoughts, listen, man, nothing can stop the word from doing in you what it was sent to do. Nothing. And so if you think you see things that are keeping it, you're feeling like Paul. Maybe you've called out to God thrice. And you're thinking, God, what the hell, man? And you say, what the hell? Because you feel like you're experiencing hell. You're like, I thought you came to save me from the fiery pit. What the hell? Right? And so God would come and say, my grace is your sufficiency to overcome. See, what happens is your eyes get off of what's happening or what you see around you, and then they get back onto the strength of God and the resurrection. Then you find your joy returning. Then you find your life that you thought was laid down, where you're just flat on your back and I've fallen and I can't get up. Right? Then all of a sudden you find you're standing again. And you don't really know how you got up. All of a sudden the trees look green again. The grass looks green again. All of a sudden you find yourself enjoying the sunset again. And you find freedom come back. That's what can happen. Right? Because God sent forth His Word to bring forth life in us. And there's sometimes where we encounter things that make it look like life ain't coming forth in us. And we think, man, I've been sitting with the Word. What's going on, man? And we become frustrated and upset. It's because our eyes have gotten fixated on the circumstances. There's no shame in that. We live in a carnal world where we see those things, and those things are real. It's not like they're figments of our imagination. Right? We didn't imagine this hell. Right? But what can happen is when we can see that God's grace is our sufficiency, we can start glorying in our weakness. Right? What that just means is it means that you don't look at the weakness you see around you or the infirmity you see in your life. You don't look at that and think that it's killing you or that it's conquering you or that it can keep you from life. You realize that God's grace is my sufficiency for life. I saw that grace manifest in the resurrection, and I saw it conquer all death. And now you begin meditating on the resurrection and the grace of God instead of the weakness or the infirmity. Right? And then fullness of joy comes back. But there's no shame if you find yourself, feeling like there's a burden on you. And you're like, oh, man. There's no shame in that. Right? It just means that you've encountered something that ain't for you. God would agree with you. That ain't for you. Right? Does that make sense? I don't know how we got off into that, but, maybe somebody needed to hear that. Because sometimes we think Isaiah said, my word will go forth and it will accomplish that which it came to do and nothing can stop it. And sometimes we only look at it on a global scale. One day, heaven will come to earth. No. It has that application, but it also has an individual application in each one of our lives. Because the world's trying to make us think we're fools for believing that word. Yeah. And the way that it does it is through circumstances. Yeah. Right? That's what it tried to do to Jesus. You're a fool, man. Look at you. Jesus was closer to real life while He was hanging on the cross than He ever was at any time that He walked the earth. Because that was the closest to resurrection.
Well, like you said, we're walking through the valley of the shadow of death. We're walking through. And we're going to see all the circumstances are shadows.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah, and that's exactly it, and the great way to say it. And that's what Jesus was talking about. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. That's Jesus. What's the valley of the shadow of death? He's hanging on the cross. I will not fear this death. What did Adam do? Adam said, it says he was afraid. What did Hebrews say? We were all our days in bondage through the fear of death. Jesus comes, he takes our death. He says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not fear this death. The Lord is my shepherd. I do not lack life. Your rod, which is your Holy Spirit, it comforts me in this place. The word of truth comforted Jesus. Yea, though he walked through the valley of the shadow of death. That's your story, man. He came to interpret our history because we came out with the wrong conclusion. And so he came like a storyteller. It's time for the story guy. There used to be this funny morning TV show on B97 back when I was like a teenager, and every day riding to high school. It's time for the story guy. And so that's how Jesus is, man. He's like the story guy. He come to tell us our story because we couldn't see it. And we were walking through the valley of the shadow of death. And we made conclusions about our story because we were walking through the valley of the shadow of death. Right? We made conclusions about God, about ourselves, what God's thoughts and intentions were towards us, whether we had life or not, where life was found. We made conclusions. Guess what? None of them were true. That's why Paul said, be ye transformed by the renewal of your mind. Listen, man, he wasn't saying that you'll be transformed by you thinking that it's bad to murder and it's good to love. Listen, everybody knows that it's bad to murder. Cain hid. There was no thou shalt not murder. After Cain, before Cain murdered Abel, there was no thou shalt murder. Why did Cain feel like he did something wrong? Paul said it this way when he was writing to the Roman church who had a Jew and Gentile scenario, and he was trying to help those guys understand each other and understand how they're one. Right? He came and said the Gentiles who had not the law even have the law written on their hearts. What he's saying is the conscience of a human being has the law written on their hearts. Psychology has given us the idea that there's certain psychopathic people who don't have a conscience. Listen, Herod was the most psychopathic serial killer that ever lived. He issued an edict to murder hundreds of thousands of babies. Okay? Now, based on our psychology, we would say he doesn't have a conscience. Yet, when the angels showed up, it says Herod was filled with fear. Well, if he didn't think he'd done anything wrong, why was he filled with fear?
Why did he want to kill the babies in the first place?
Exactly.
He was afraid.
Yeah. Fear. That's exactly right. He was in bondage to trying to exalt himself by his own ability because he was afraid. He was going to be in lack. That's exactly right. That's the fear. The fear of death. The fear compels us to try to clothe ourselves. Adam was afraid. He thought he had to clothe himself. Right? Why was Adam afraid? Because he thought God was ashamed of him and angry with him because he ate from the tree. He thought God would see the body of death he had and that God would reject him. And he thought that the death he had meant God had forsaken him. And so he was filled with fear. And he thought, I have to be the father of my own life. I better start clothing myself. I don't have anyone to swaddle me. What's that funny movie with Vince Vaughn and Reese Witherspoon? It's like Christmas Vacation or something, and they reenact the play with Jesus, and she's supposed to swaddle the baby, and he's got the swaddle wrapped around his waist, and she's like, give me the swaddle, and he's all, move out of the way, unfit mother. I must swaddle this baby. And so he swaddles the baby. Listen, man, Adam thought that he didn't have anyone who would swaddle him. He was naked. He needed to be clothed, and he thought he didn't have anyone to swaddle him. He thought the fact that he was naked was that God had forsaken him. And so he said, I got to swaddle myself. That's what it means for your mind to be renewed. It means for your mind to be renewed from the mind of Adam and all the conclusions Adam came to about his life and his life with God in light of his sin. It means to have your mind renewed from that to the conclusions that Jesus came to about himself and his life with God while Jesus hung on the cross, naked, needing to be swaddled. Right? Jesus also hung on the cross naked. He came to a different conclusion than Adam did. Well, he had the same sin and death as Adam. There he hung. He heard the same voices telling him he was forsaken by God, telling him he wasn't the Son of God anymore, telling him he was in the earth without a father. You better father your own life. Jesus heard the same thing. But Jesus came to a different conclusion. He says, God does not despise me because of this sin and death. God does not despise me because I have an inability to clothe myself with life. God is not ashamed of me because of my nakedness or my sin and my death. But God loves me. His love for me is that which is from the beginning. If it's that which is from the beginning, that means it can't change. We think God's love and acceptance of us is based on whether we're clothed in good fruit or bad fruit. We do. That's a lie. God wanting to be your Father and to give you life and to bring you into His house has nothing to do with whether you're clothed with good fruit or bad fruit. The prodigal son was clothed in pig slop. They didn't have showers. He didn't come home and take a shower first. And not only was he clothed in pig slop, he had to travel in the sun in the pig slop. And so did the father say, listen, man, you're not acceptable. You need to go clean up in the river, and then maybe I'll accept you. And then maybe you could come into the house. No. It says the father fell on his neck and kissed him and wept. And then it says the father brought him into the house, and the father put the best robe on him. Guess whose robe is the best robe? The father's robe. The father gave the prodigal the best robe. Listen, guys, the prodigal's the one who wasted his inheritance. He wasn't the one doing the good works. The one doing the good works wouldn't come into the party. The one that had all the good works cast himself out into outer darkness. You see, Jesus came to a different conclusion when he hung on the cross. See, he knew something about Abba. He knew something about God as Abba and himself as Son, and what that meant about their life. Even should Abba find me bloodied, even should Abba find me in blood, even should Abba find me clothed in sin and death and darkness, he knew something about how Abba would respond that caused him to think, I am not in the earth without a father. Right? So he didn't do like the first Adam did. He didn't try to clothe himself. He cried out to Abba. And we have this whole horrible teaching about how God forsook Jesus at the cross. Listen, Paul said it this way. Those who are led by the Spirit of God, he said this in Romans 8, you can read it for yourself. Those who are led by the Spirit of God, guess what they do? They cry out, Abba. What did Jesus do when he was hanging on the cross, dying? He cried out, Abba. Well, isn't it the Spirit that leads a person to cry out, Abba, Paul said? So, did the Spirit lead Jesus to cry out, Abba, or not? Yeah. Yes, he did.
I thought you meant did he lead him?
No. Did the Spirit lead Jesus to cry out, Abba, on the cross or not? Because Jesus cried out, Abba. Was Jesus the Son of God on the cross or not?
Yes.
Was there ever a time when he wasn't the Son? Isn't that the lie? Wasn't that what the Pharisees said? Were the Pharisees filled with the Spirit of God? Paul said that those who are the sons of God are led by the Spirit of God. And he says the way they're the sons of God is because their heart cries out, Abba. So Jesus was the Son, and his heart cried out, Abba. And he was led to cry out, Abba, by the Spirit that was in him, even as he hung on the cross. God wasn't far from Jesus. God was in Jesus, reconciling the world to himself. That's one of the most damaging and anti-Christ messages that's ever entered the church. It's actually it's the lie that Adam believed. That's what led to Adam clothing himself. He believed God had forsaken him. Right? And so what the serpent does is he says, well, if I can get people to think God not only forsook them in the past, but he forsook Jesus. Listen, man, that doesn't bode well for people's hearts trusting God when they find themselves in need. When are we in need? When we're in sin. When are we in need? When we're in death. When are we in need? When we feel like our lives are being conquered by the sin and death in the world. What does the devil want you to think? God's far from you. What does the devil want you to think? This means you're not the son. What does the devil want you to think? You're a fool if you think you cry out to God and he's going to come to you. What does the devil want you to think? But if you can use your ability to bring forth good fruit and stop all this nonsense going on, then God will come to you.
That's what I heard like years and years ago. If you paint yourself in a corner, pretty much you've done it. You know, you're on your own.
But you know, you can never not be the son of your mother and father.
All right.
So if we just stop that, I can never not be the son or daughter. No matter what I do, where I go, or anything, I am.
Yeah.
Already I am.
I am. He is the great I am. And if we were hewn from the rock, then we're also born from I am. And so our lives are designed to be born from the persuasion of I am the son. I am the daughter. I am. Right?
You can't be I was and you can't be I will be. You have to be I am.
Right. The thing that comes into play is, will I experience the life of a son?
There you go.
Will I experience the life of a daughter? That's what the gospel is about. The gospel isn't about whether you are a son or a daughter. Of course you're a son or a daughter. Isaiah said you've forgotten the rock from which you were hewn. He didn't say you weren't cut from the rock. And so the question isn't whether we're sons and daughters. Yes, we're sons and daughters. The question is, are we going to believe God is our Father? And by that, allow Him to place His name behind our name, meaning giving us His life. Right? And that's what it means, the adoption of sons, the adoption of children. In the day Jesus returns, all those who have believed on Jesus, which means to believe you're the son and daughter of God. That's why Paul said that those who are led by the Spirit of God, that Spirit dwells in them, confirming to their spirit that they are the children of God.
The Pharisees were also children.
Absolutely they were. Absolutely they were. Everybody is. But the Pharisees did something different. See, they took on the life of the serpent. So they were children of God that took on the life of a surrogate. Right? They claimed something else as their father than God. Right? And that was their problem. Yeah, that was their problem. They allowed their life to be animated by the viper instead of by the Spirit. Right? Just like the prodigal son. It never says he wasn't the son. But his life became fashioned according to the wisdom of the world when he was out in the world. Right? He was still a son, but he wasn't experiencing the life of a son, was he? Right. He was lost. Yeah.
God, what manner of man.
And to say it as radical as you could say it, even when Jesus comes back, God's going to come back to call everybody sons and daughters, but some people's hearts are going to say, I'm not. They're going to say, I'm not the son. I'm not the daughter. Their heart isn't going to cry out, Abba, when he comes back. They're going to see themselves naked when God comes back, just like the first Adam. And so they're not going to believe they're the sons and daughters of God. So they're going to cower away from Abba in fear. And they're going to condemn themselves to the second death. Meanwhile, God come to kill death and to save everyone. He don't come to save some. He come to save everyone. Right? But those who don't have the Spirit of the Son in them through faith will not see God as Abba. Their hearts won't say Abba. Their hearts will be like Herod. They'll be filled with fear and shame. They'll see their nakedness just like the first Adam. And then they'll run away in fear. And that's why it says God takes no pleasure in the destruction of the wicked. Wicked doesn't mean like Count Dracula, guys. It doesn't mean they're ugly to God. If they were ugly to God, He'd take some pleasure in their destruction. Right? What it means, wicked means to be filled with labor and toiling. So those who are filled with this persuasion that says you must exalt yourself, you must clothe yourself with life, and they reject the Spirit of the living God, man, God will take no pleasure in those guys perishing because they came from Him. He found beauty in them. He found value in them.
Well, it's just, so, I'm saying shame, but I don't mean to shame, but it's such a shame that people would not accept what this beautiful thing that God's given us.
Absolutely it is.
And so it makes him, I think, sorry that they can't receive from
Grieved. And we see everything in Jesus. Jesus is the perfect expression of the Father in every situation, John said. And so we see Jesus. Jesus coming to Jerusalem is like a picture of when Jesus is going to come back in the end. When He came to Jerusalem, He came to gather to Himself, didn't He? And then He says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I came to gather you to myself, but you would not. He didn't say He would not. He said they would not. And He's crying and He's grieved. That's a picture of the Father in the day Jesus comes back to gather everyone in the world to Himself, but some will not. And He's going to be like Jesus. He's going to, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I came to gather you to myself, but you would not. And He's going to shed a tear. He's going to be grieved in His heart. He's going to be in shocking disbelief that He came to give life for free. He's not coming to get us to work in His house. He's coming to serve us. Just like Jesus said, the Son of Man didn't come to be served, He came to serve. God ain't coming so we can serve Him. He's coming to serve us. All for all eternity. And so He's going to be in shocking disbelief that there's going to be some who don't want that, man. I hope that makes some sense.
And the love that He has for those, He won't get to be with them.
No, He'll be grieved.
Yeah.
He'll be grieved. But His grief will not be eternal because they got what they wanted. Right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, when He made Adam, He breathed into the breath of life. He borrowed Adam his life. And He gave Adam an opportunity. Adam, you can take this life I've borrowed you, and you can live eternally with me. And we can walk in the cool of the day, where I'll speak well of you. You'll see how beautiful you are to me. That'll fill your heart with the beauty of me. We'll speak well of each other. We'll enjoy life. I'll provide life for you. The houses will be built. The buildings will be made. The fruit will all be there. You won't do anything. You won't have to work. We'll just enjoy life together. Man, that's what God has. And so it's shocking that people don't want that.
Yeah, exactly.
And so Adam he could take the life he was borrowed, and he could eat from the tree of life and then be clothed in the immortality of God. An immortal being can't die. Right? Or he could take the life that God borrowed him, and if he didn't want to live eternally with God, he could return to the dust of the ground. That's why God told Adam, because you ate from that tree that will kill you, listen, you'll return to the dust of the ground now. If you notice, the lie of the serpent told Adam and Eve, you won't die. No, you won't die. You're already immortal. They weren't immortal yet. An immortal can't die. So God wouldn't have told them, don't eat from that tree lest you die, if they couldn't die. The serpent came, thou shalt not surely die. That shalt not surely die. That's like one of the original lies. Thou shalt not surely die. And so the same, Adam means man in Hebrew. That's a picture of all of us. There's the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the earth. God has gotten down on one knee, on bended knee to the whole world, just like He got down on bended knee to Adam, and He has declared His love and adoration for us in the person of Jesus. He has promised to make us fruitful apart from our works, and He's promised to make us fruitful by His doing. Right? And He's told us, this tree over here, it will kill you. Don't eat from it. This tree over here will clothe you in eternal life. Right? It's the same thing that's happened all over again with us. So we have a borrowed life. If we want to live eternally with God in love, we eat from the tree of life, which is Jesus. Right? And we don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Glory to God. I'm going to go get in there and sing some songs. Is there any way we can have you
Yeah.
today?
Can you do it now?
Yeah, I'll do it.